Episode 488, Denialism Dissected. Probing beyond the obvious, we'll ask questions about the apparently growing neopop denialist movement and whether there's a deeper set of implications connected to the way the human mind itself works. What is real? What is imaginary? How does belief alter our perception? And if we create our own mythos, and if we create our own reality, but cannot tell the difference between the two, how do we resolve the resulting conflict created by the apparent clash between our various chosen truths? This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hello, and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Before we dive deep into all of those questions and many more, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the imaginary literary entertainment robot from a parallel dimension, DJ Zed, and his freshest, newest track, Driving Depth Subconscious, a remix live, improvised, live-to-tape entertainment audio loop asset performance utilizing the Driving Techno asset pack. Improvised with digital and analog loving care for your ear holes to consume. Please enjoy and feel free to wiggle in your chair or outright get up and dance. podcast is not your grandpappy's podcast. You are about to embark on a journey of the Imaginarium at the center of your mind, guided by your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Please be advised, this show is unorthodox, real, raw, and radically unscripted. No one is telling this cartoon character podcast host what to say or when to say it. Mature themes and adult language are used moderately, occasionally, but not too heavy-handedly. This show is intended to be a civil, adult, and respectful space for civilized public discourse about the strange, surreal, and fantastic, as well as the mundane, political, and IRL. Some themes may be strange and unusual to listeners. Please keep your mind open and unjudgmental as we discuss and discourse, as we engage in public discourse. Like I said, this show is real, raw, and radically unscripted, and sometimes I will fumble along the way. It's a little rough around the edges, but it's brought to you with genuine, authentic heart. And for those who are curious, yes, it has ingredients of the fantastical and fictional, because although I am sharing as a creative content creator my very genuine and authentic personal opinion about the world as I have lived through it and experienced it, I'm also incorporating this show as a real object from real life into the literary context of my book series, which is a work of fiction. Some of these podcast episodes will indeed be described as complete works of fiction, but most of these podcast episodes are intended to be considered like a real-life radio disc jockey opinion talk show with featured music. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa, and that's DJ Zed, my imaginary sidekick on the audio asset drumbeat mechanisms, creating music to accompany my rambling. If you would like to hear his music without me talking through it half the time, without any other interruption besides the occasional ad revenue interruption, please head on over to soundcloud.com/Mr. Zappa. Sorry that it's not /Mr. You weren't there, that I signed up and just didn't think about it. I apologize. DJ Zed, my imaginary sidekick, is looking at me with disdain and stoic judgment, but that's okay. We are the bestest of buddies, and you too can read about our very fictional adventures across the multiverse brand Zeppoverse over at Wattpad.com. I forget the rest of the link, but you can find it quite easily over at solo.to/Mr. Zappa. Okay, enough self-promotion and disclaimering about the show. Welcome, friends. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night to you, wherever you are listening to this podcast from the many nations around this living orb. I thank you, and I welcome you. Namaste. Let us all agree to one or two things whenever we engage in this public discourse imaginarium experience, as I like to call it. Let us agree to set aside as many of our prejudices and political ideological constructs at the door, and consider the ideas as presented on their own merit, acknowledging that they're coming from someone that does not pretend to be an expert in anything. This guy. I'm just a creative content creator, struggling to try to make a little bit of that American digital income dream by hustling my thoughts and sharing with you on the interwebs my real life concerns about what's going on and how I'd like to address them in my literary fantasy fiction creative efforts, the way any undiscovered aspiring author / soon to be published fiction writer might, should they be hosting their own weird, experimental, and eccentric podcast. Such is the experience. I enjoin you, my friends, and forgive me for the rhetorical meta commentary, but we're about to do a deep dive into something that's sort of like lucid dreaming once you really start thinking about it too intensely. And that's the function of belief and denialism as two sides of the same coin of the human psyche, and how it is being applied, misapplied, perhaps manipulated in our pop cultural, postmodern, near dystopian political landscape that we call Trumptopia / the formerly known as the United States of America, experiment in whatever this is, which I love and respect and admire in its messy, sticky, gross, sometimes triggering jumble of human foibles that it is. Because I don't pretend it to be anything other than what I see. But that's just me. Welcome to the show, folks. I lost a dangling thought in the middle of all that intro, which was that, for those of you who are new, and as a refresher for those of you who may be coming back to the show and are longtime listeners, let us join together in deep inner mind work, inner contemplation, right? You're here because you're either curious or are already a fan of the show, or you've come across it randomly and you're like, what's going on? Deep in the center of our minds, our imagination creates a space where we can sort of visualize the words that are running through our minds. And whether we recognize it consciously or not, that is a thing we call audience. And it's the space we go to enjoy content. It's the mental space we create either individually or collectively when we watch a play or watch a movie or read a book or listen to a podcast. Whether we have language in our conscious minds about it or not, it happens. And I invoke you to lean into it consciously and sit back, relax, have your cup of coffee if you're listening in the morning, sip that wine if you're listening a bit later in the evening, whatever it is your personal context is. Put it up real loud while you do the chores, whatever. Just engage that free-spirited, internal, innate, natural, organic capacity that we all have always had, that maybe we might have a little bit of a strange, distant relationship with if we weren't the kinds of kids that daydreamed constantly in school, but that I believe is part of the human phenomena. Why do I invoke that here and now? Because I believe it is core to the experience we are experiencing, individually and collectively, whether we realize it or not. And that if we don't acknowledge it, it may impact our understanding, our rationalization, and our literal perception of history, current events, pop culture, society around us, the world we live in at large. So let us acknowledge it. Let us honor it. Let us thank it for being so rich and vivid and sometimes bizarre and crazy. And its capacities are that, are things that we are capable of observing and acknowledging and discussing and taking into account, perhaps. Let's connect some dots. Life is a great experiment. At least I like to think so. And it's about to be 11:11 a.m., but I'm a little early. Life itself, before ideology, before political identity, before cultural norms, trends, systems, etc. There's 11:11, magical hour time. Make a wish, folks. If you believe strong enough. Is that crazy or is that real? It is and it isn't. Everything is a dichotomy. All truths are half-truths, as, who was it? Not Hermes. It's part of the what? My brain sometimes doesn't work, but it's because we have too much information available to us at all times. And As the Hermetic tradition teaches us, or at least seems to want to try, I believe, if I'm not misremembering, if my neurons aren't misfiring, there's some sort of reference there, some sort of wisdom declaration that all truths are merely half-truths, because the light and the dark are not separate, because the yin and the yang are not trying to destroy each other, because the mountain and the valley are not two different things, right? Because the air we breathe and our lungs are not actually individuated to the point of being mutually exclusive. We can go on and on and on. The fractal, holographic, recursive reality is mind-boggling. This living uterus of epic, infinite cosmic proportions is daunting. And I suggest to you, dear friends, the human species has a survival instinct, a psychological tendency that's innate and ingrown and sort of subliminated and hyper-normalized of flattening everything down, of pretending it's not as crazy and wild and as big and mysterious and magical as it actually is, of denying its aliveness as a means to just cope. I'm alive, but that rock is not. And, history is linear. And a whole set of statements that you could easily dismiss as tropes, that you could easily pretend you don't believe in, but that are fundamental to our sort of just like, we got to get up and drink coffee and poop and shower and do our things. And sorry if that's crass, but we got to do the mundane things and survive in this system of systems that we as a collective whole invented. And we can't deny that we're standing on the shoulders of the generations that came before us, and that in some hyperbolic way they are standing on ours, even though they're not, right? Not literally, not physically, and that you as an individual aren't responsible for your parents' foibles, but simultaneously, collectively, we sort of have to step up and take responsibility for what we were born into. Otherwise, we're just kicking the can down the road and leaving the problem solving, which, if I may put a pin on the corkboard and interrupt myself, sidebar, is that or is that not something that is a civic duty, an unfortunately inherited responsibility? Because it is morally right, because it is the correct thing to do, as opposed to the shady, arguably, quote-unquote, corrupt, misguided thing to do. However you want to slice it. And I'm not making moral judgments per se, although isn't that exactly what morality is? I digress. I reel it back. We live in a mysterious world that has many moving parts to it. The mundane, the mechanical, the apparently inanimate. Apparently, I say, and I do try to choose my words wisely, even when I'm spitting them quick fire and wild and rapidly beyond my own control, sometimes. I'm trying to drop my thoughts on what I think things really are. Some might call that dropping truths. But I'm not a preacher, but some have told me to preach. I'm not a prophet, but some have, we are all these individuals with raging egos and saintly angels, with devils and demons and divinity and light. And we are flawed because we flatten things down, or we are burdened by the flaw that we have progressively evolved and chosen to perpetuate, and sometimes choose to manipulate, this capacity to flatten it all down to as cartoony, reductionist, simplistic, it's me against the world or whatever, reductionist kind of thinking that is often just riddled with our own inherent and our culturally inherited ego traps of buying into something that is more comfortable than it is real, that is more satisfying than it is honest. And we all have that flaw. We all have that capacity. Some might argue that it has something to do with all that talk about original sin. But let's just leave that as a pin on the corkboard, right? As I'm sure we've discussed it in depth in previous episodes, and we'll return to it again. And I don't mean to drag that whole messy, confusing bag of issues in. The light and the dark are not trying to destroy each other, in my humble opinion. And why is that important? Let me connect some dots. Take a big breath. Set down your baggage, like I invited you to, and I sort of silently invite you to in the Zen practice that is this show throughout. As you travel forward with me on the, inconsistently consistent chaos that is the way in which I drop this show, and or are journeying backwards in time with me as you go digging through the playlist that is the 5 years catalog worth of episodes, I entreat you. Let's be as neutral as possible about it. We are alive. It's a mystery. It's confusing. And therefore, we, collectively, the royal we, us as individuals and us as our forefathers in the multitudes of generations, which is mind-boggling enough to try to visualize or imagine, but we constantly romanticize in all the storytelling and art making of cultural examination or fanciful escapism. We make things up to the best of our ability, flawed as it is, and riddled with ego traps as it may be, about what we think is going on in the world. And I'm not excluding myself from any of this, right? Like, I'm sharing with you my deepest inner workings of the very process. We make things up about what's going on in the world, and then go on a series of potential paths depending on whether we believe those things blindly, right? Do we make assumptions, project those assumptions, and then assume our assumptions are correct? Or do we, more in the spirit of the scientific method, and I know that's tarnished, but put a pin on the corkboard, or recognize the pin on the corkboard that's already there, do we approach life, our very living of it, our daily experiencing and archiving or lack thereof of our experiences in a sort of pseudo-individual scientific way and go, I see things, I experience things, I feel things, I develop projections about them, because what else are beliefs if they are not projections back out into the canvas of the world? I ideate, I daydream, I cognitively process image and sound and thought and arithmetic and language and symbolism and my own self-analysis of that. And either rationally or irrationally, or a mixture of both, come to conclusions which I then either keep testing or lock down real tight, or something in between, right? That is undeniably at the very core of the human experience, whether we recognize it or not. I think that if we spend a little time contemplating our experience, we can recognize that some version of that seems to be the case. And if we don't, then, perhaps we need to look a little deeper, because it's happening. I humbly propose to you. In a lightning fast, faster than synapses fire kind of way, we are witnessing everything from our very, cellular division to manifest growth over time and decay, eventually, entropy and whatnot, and the inexplicable activity of the human genome. It's all there. It's all real. And we know it is because despite whatever efforts to deny it, anybody can theoretically go and study the sciences for themselves and test the theories for themselves eventually with enough time and effort. Mind you, it's kind of expensive, because even if you did it outside of any sort of established education system, you still need to buy things like microscopes, etc., and or gain access to technology. Sure, they're barriers. Why is that? Why do I point that out? We collectively, arguably, have this phenomena happening, right? Whether we're taking it really seriously and taking a really scientific approach, or we're taking it very, I don't want to use the exact opposite of seriously, but taking it very differently than that, and developing our ideations and our ideologies and our projections and our theoretical constructs in the mind. However, we build them, we project them, and then we live our lives with them sort of either masking our perceptions, filtering our perceptions, or being confirmed by our perceptions. And it's a really messy, gooey, sticky feedback loop of like, we don't even really know how that works, do we? Right? And there are people of all kinds proposing examples and theories and models about that. It's part of our very culture. From the theory of gravity, which no one seems to be able to, we can't seem to take for granted because there's still a raging debate about whether or not it's valid or true, quote unquote. I use both of those words as like keywords that are all arguable and presumed to be concrete, but are actually quite fluid and dynamic. And thus all of that, from the craziest of the quantum mechanical to the most transcendently mind-blowing of the Zen. And if you need a recap on all that, there's a few handy-dandy books and pieces of media out there. And you can, of course, always must do your own research and find your own path through it all. But there's a mind-blowing amount of content. And so, of course, we can't avoid but help to sort of fall for the trap of, falling into trends and or cliches of like what we research and what we don't. But I digress. I was about to make some recommendations, and if I may, I'd like to couch some recommendations here as a sort of pin on the corkboard. In terms of non-fiction books you can go get in electric format or in physical format, the top 3 consistently, and I review and re-question, and of course, I can't afford to go buying a billion more books, but I always invite and welcome recommendations of things that might upgrade or supplant these. But I find them delightful and wonderful and enjoy rereading them myself, and have done so on multiple occasions, and probably will continue to do so. And if I had to, based on the books I've read, the books I've heard about, and the books that I theoretically coulda, shoulda, woulda, might have read, I bet they would continue to be contenders for books I would try to preserve into some sort of post-apocalyptic dystopia, and that I would preach from and be like, folks, we need to consider this as we survive and rebuild and strive to thrive instead of, re-enslave ourselves to dysfunctional systems that are deeply toxic. Wow, that was a mouthful. But here are the books that I would recommend, that I would put on that list, as clunky as that title for that list was. Books that should survive and be understood by whoever rebuilds society. And I shit you not, this is real. No one's paying me to say this. This is honestly, authentically, at the core of my being, like, if I could, I would start my own, whatever hoops I would need to jump through to make it happen and make it legit, book club of a TV show where we all read these. And I'm going to read off 1, 2, 3, 4 books in no particular order. The Law of Light by Lars Muhl, and that is spelled Larsmuhl, right? And I don't mean any infringement from whoever holds the rights and whoever's been publishing, blah, blah, blah. I'm enthusiastically, as a pop cultural commentator in the world, recommending these books. Go buy them. Or go read them for free, but don't do it illegally. And genuinely take this as an authentic recommendation, because none of these people are paying me to do so. And if they were, I would disclose it. I really would. I'd be like, hey guys, I've team branded and made a partnership deal with blah, blah, blah publishers and I would do it, but I'm not. I genuinely am not. I love these books. The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. And that's spelled AlanWatts. The Dancing Wu Li Masters by Gary Zukov. That name is spelled Gary Z or Z UKAV. And finally, A History of God by Karen Armstrong. KarenArmstrong, one word. Okay, enough of that. Put pins on the corkboard, because there's special deep dive episodes called explicitly, I titled them Unauthorized and Explicit Readings, where I think I correctly follow all the guidelines of being like a sort of review, media, a long-form media review book club podcast about these books. And if I need to get further permissions to keep those episodes up, I will try. And if I need to take them down, you don't need to send me a cease and desist letter. Just let me know that I wasn't supposed to do it that way, and I'll take them down. But I genuinely, earnestly, as a real-life human being, as a reader of books, as a lover of both nonfiction and fiction books, these are my top 1, 2, 3, 4. I should probably make a top 5 list. I've got too many books on my top tier shelf list of all-time favorites to whittle them down. And I've got too many books on the I haven't read them yet list. Who knows what this list will be 10 years from now. I love these books. And I humbly invite you to welcome them into your life if you've got the capacity and the disposable income to go get these books. If you don't, that's what libraries are for. Even if you do and you don't want to spend the money, you want to preview them for free, that's what libraries are for. Go support your local library. Okay, enough of that. And help support this podcast by digging deep down into the catalog playlist of episodes and seeking out my explicit and unauthorized and explicit readings series, in which I read from these selected books and a few others. Hopefully within the bounds of not being an infringement, and with all due respect of the rights wherever they belong, because these books are brilliant and deserve to be read and should be read. While I'm promoting other episodes or subsegment series of this show, I also have a wild and wacky media review episode, which is for like visual media, for like basically movie media, cinema, television, etc., called Totally Irrelevant Media Reviews. Check those out. I've got a couple of new ones planned and developing, which I think I should be dropping soon. I humbly thank you. Okay. Dear friends, have you ever questioned your reality? Don't sue me, Westworld. Hopefully you have. Hopefully you haven't ensnarled yourself in the briar patch, thorny, twisty, twiny vines of paranoid delusion, because please be advised that's entirely real and entirely possible. Questioning our own reality is one of the existential questions that have been around forever with the human species. And it's a thorny patch to get through. It is a briar patch of scary thoughts and dangerous emotions, most of which sage wisdom teachers have advised us in the past. People, fictional or real or otherwise, like the Buddha and the Jesus Christ, have warned us are the nightmare side of this living dream that we are living in. Why do I choose such language? Because it is the salve against the political manipulation of our concrete thinking, in my humble opinion. Now, there's a dangerous side, because all truths are half-truths, and all edges of those truths are blades that cut multiple ways. Cliche or the deepest thinky thoughts that I've had lately? I don't know. You tell me. But I do believe that a truth can be riddled with falsehood. And that organically, the human species does this not because there's some nefarious other subjugating us. The only one subjugating us is ourselves, in my humble opinion. The only forces we must answer to and hold accountable is ourselves as a species, in the context that we find ourselves in this glimmering, tiny, living bubble of life birthing that we flatten out and minimize, both literally and figuratively, cognitively and politically, metaphysically, and all the other ways that we could, in order to tolerate neglecting its alivehood, its personhood, dare I say it. We've minimized personhood to be exclusively this cookie cutter shape. If it isn't one of us, then it's not real, and it's not alive, and it's not a person, is one of the fundamental misguided half-truths, falsehoods that have been propped up as true truths, as absolute truths. And I am one of those people that subscribes to the wild and crazy notion that the only absolute truth is that there are no absolute truths, except for the raw consciousness duality, non-duality problem. And if you're not dealing with that, you're not dealing with a lot of what's most crazy about our world, that we can not just that we can and should and must arguably acknowledge, but learn how to understand, learn how to contend with, learn how to integrate into our everyday, mundane, real life, political, pop cultural world, in lieu of radically ignoring it, as opposed to radically ignoring it in a way that I humbly suggest to you is not just silly, but arguably toxic, deeply unhealthy, misguided, misleading in and of itself. To deny the living aliveness and the more nuanced, complex realities of this holographic, fractal mind consciousness that is the universe, and the way it works, and the way that we can be manipulated into having it work against our better interests, evolutionarily speaking, societally speaking, and individually. Right? If we don't address that, then we can't fix the water problem in the infrastructure of our multiple nation states. We can't fix the energy problem. Right? Because if we're still, as Einstein pointed out, if we're still trying to solve the problems with the mental tools that we use to build them, whether we realize we were building our own problems or not, whether our forefathers realized that they were building our future generations' problems or not, we can't pick up those same tools and beat each other over the head with them. And so we cycle back to the title and the blurb of this episode that got introduced, that, for it to all make sense for myself. Where did I put that? Because now I am totally blanked on what it actually said. Oh, here it is. Denialism Dissected. Not because anyone told me to think so, but because I've seen it decade after decade since I started paying attention to the political landscape, to the political discussion, to the public discourse about the political history and current events of what's going on in the world, and through the lens of someone stuck living here in the dream, in the aspirational social experiment, in the nation-state / theoretical construct that is these grand old United States of ours. Because it's much more than just a country. And we sort of flatten it, we even flatten that down, right? Or rather, a country is so much more than what we generally conceptually acknowledge to it. Is there a neo-pop cultural denialism movement? I think so. And I've been seeing the progression of its dystopic, paranoid, accusational, dysfunctional mentality since Ronald Reagan was in office. And I can see the historical roots of it going deeper and further back than that. A post-modern cult of ideology that is deeply rooted in the history and toxicity of organized religion at large in the human species as we perceive it and experience it here in this particular dimension. And while we could fixate on the narrative of the specific history that we seem to be living through, one of the things, as the clock chimes 41:41 in terms of minutes recorded, it's infinitely more than that, right? If we work in a hybrid quantum mechanical Zen holographically fractal recursive worldview. And to get a taste of what that's like, go watch Midnight Gospel. Sorry for the explicit new media reference. Another show that's on my list of I really need to do a special sub-series of the totally irrelevant media review, like deep dive, like 2 or 3 parter on, because it's volumes of stuff, of brilliant, mind-blowing stuff that's arguably real and at play in our mundane lives as we live them. And if you don't know what those are, that's fine. No judgment. Put a pin on the corkboard. If you don't have access to Netflix to watch it, hang tight and tune in when I finally get around to discussing it, and just engage with the ideas as shared therein. And or head over to a friend's house that's got Netflix or organize a Netflix viewing party at a friend's that's got Netflix and go watch it. No one's paying me to say that, folks. I'm just that impressed by that piece of media and what it engages in discussing and why. At first blush, I acknowledge that it's difficult to integrate and come to terms with why someone such as myself would say, hey, the metaphysical has deep implications to our political, and the political has deep implications to our metaphysical, right? And we should not be, although I do not want a convergence of pseudo-spiritual belief into politics, right? I do want to propose and suggest that, although I guess arguably I'm almost setting myself up to sound like a hypocrite, because I jokingly, satirically, for entertainment purposes, have created the Facebook group that's supposed to be the grassroots movement of discovering how many people would support a political party that uses the word transcendental in its name. If there might be such a thing as a transcendentalist political party, what would that be like? And I've done so because I'm challenging myself to imagine a sci-fi literary world in which politics has evolved to a weird and wacky, almost cartoonish place. And there is a growing transcendent Zen-like political party, scraping and scrabbling to try to get momentum enough in national and global politics to sort of counteract the height of absurdity that I imagine in a sort of, I'm a futurist, visionary fiction writer in the tradition of insert your favorite one here, because there's many that I would also reference. Where are a few? Over there from my fictional reading book. But obviously, the obvious ones, the 2 big favorites, Aldous Huxley and George Orwell. Not that I claim to be anything other than what I am, but there's some of my, literary nerd, aspiring author aspirational thoughts for you. Of course, even they are bandied about by both sides of the political spectrum in a way that just makes you go, ugh, facepalm, good grief. You know what I mean? It's like both sides of the contemporary American political system are increasingly creeping towards the edge of this sort of, let's just deny the other side completely because they're irrational and paranoid and potentially evil. And it's cartoonish. I've made original memes to express just how cartoonish I believe it's gotten. And it has been escalating and escalating and escalating. And it impacts everyone in American society negatively. And it's being exported, right? It has been. It's not. It may not even be original to the United States. But it's also, in no way, shape, or form, the totality of the human experience. It's just the foaming froth of the political discourse, right? The human experience is sublimely different and profoundly more nuanced and beautiful and mysterious and magical and profoundly healing than that. And if we set aside our political discourse ideological lenses long enough to truly reconnect with our fundamental human phenomenological experience as it can actually be experienced directly. That's why yoga and Zen and spiritual practices are so inclined to almost cartoonishly direct you to focus your attention on your breath. It's the most true thing of all the true, of all the real, undeniable, undebunkable thing. Whatever it is, it's a mystery. Why do we breathe? We don't know. If you hold your breath, it sucks. Right? So you breathe, but it's so much more than the thing that we immediately do on autopilot. And it's deeply interconnected to the very mystery of life itself, both literally, in terms of how it works, how we are born, right? And how we live and how we die, which no one really wants to think about. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. It's baked into the cake for some reason, and it's part of, arguably, not just theoretically, but I think realistically, a deep-seated trauma that has gone long neglected. The central pin on the corkboard. Big, giant, glowing, alarm bells, red flags, and attention here. Central pillar of the whole concern as far as like what voice I'm trying to give, what thoughts I'm trying to give voice to in the public discourse. That I think, hey, there's value to actually acknowledging, honoring, and investigating all of that so that we don't just trample all over it in the way that we play the political football game. Call me crazy, but I'm going to sip my tea. I said what I said, and it makes sense, I think. It may be alarmingly weird and way over there in the hippie new age woo-woo beyond that, because I don't think I am a hippie new age woo-woo misguided consumerist, although, I flirted with it. It's there. There's a toxic version of everything. Just like there's a really, really toxic version of what Jesus taught. And whoever Jesus was, I don't think he was a really toxic person. Based on what appears to be, limited as my research may be, what appears to be the actual teachings of Jesus. And I put that with a big giant asterisk, because what people get at most postmodern American quote-unquote Christian churches ain't that. If they're not meditating, doing yoga, and doing a bunch of other things that are mildly controversial. And before we go to another musical break, let me drop a hot take, and I really don't want to offend. Although if offending people builds me a giant media empire, I guess I'll take it. Not to sound crazy, right? Am I aspirational? Sure. Are there ego traps there? Absolutely. Am I treading lightly? You betcha. Am I doing so in hopes that we might explore for ourselves and for each other the possibility of these what ifs? Because I'm tired of the other what ifs. I'm tired of the standard thing that the treadmill of argumentation that has been an echo chamber of treadmill of argumentation of the last 50 years of politics. I'm tired of it. And not just in a, jaded, I didn't get my own way kind of way, but in a, I've been sitting back and trying to think about it really impartially, really open-mindedly, and with a perspective of, well, what problems does it solve kind of way. And although there's been progress and celebrate the progress, of course. I'm not trying to deny that. I'm not trying to, ruin that parade. But is that progress, coming at a cost? All right. Before I spiral out of control, let me drop for your ear holes the cleansing palette audio soundscape of the following entitlement. And by that I mean what it is called, not that anyone's entitled to anything. Holographic Dreaming of Gentler Cages. A remix live to tape improvised performance of the atmospheric trap audio asset package created lovingly with literary fictional care by my imaginary sidekick, DJ Z. Contemplate this with me, dear friends. If we chronically deny the aliveness of Mother Earth, of the cosmos itself, and those mysteries therein, of course, as a species, as a society, as a collective of people, we're going to have problems of encountering the addiction to the ideological denial of other things, the denial of the dehumanification that happens inherently in racism, right? Like, why was slavery problematic? Really? Because it denied the humanity of everyone that was enslaved. That's why. That's why it's morally wrong. Why is it morally wrong to subjugate and restrict the freedoms and rights of women? Duh. Because it denies their humanity. It objectifies them. If we objectify the very living womb that is giving birth to not only ourselves, but every life form, of course we're going to objectify each other and deny, each other's realities and build up systems of toxic mutual abuse, and then fight about them, about which of these systems is most virtuous and true and righteous. So if we are really committed to solving all of the complex problems in the world as we encounter it today, right? The real ones, as well as the sidebar distractionary issue of all the crazy imagined fake ones, because there's a bunch of made-up imaginary problems that aren't going on, that are being used to manipulate people. And that's where the magic of denialist thinking really rears its ugly head, to sort of re-invoke the theme of this episode. And it begins, I think, it's rooted in this problematic denial of the living, organic, holographic, mysterious reality of the place that gives birth to us as living beings, and of the way we and it are interrelated and inseparable from each other, and how it all actually works. And the curious thing is, we can build a whole self-destructive armada of mutually exclusive theories about that pretend to be real serious and metaphysical and esoteric, or we can directly, phenomenologically commune directly with itself, with ourselves, with our subconscious selves, with our internal spiritual dimensions, with our cosmic collective mind, manifesting the infinite multiplicity of realities to experience all possible outcomes in all possible permutations of all probabilistic waveform functions of quantum mechanics, being the inner workings of ourselves. Because what's at the core of your being? What's at the center of you? There's the mind, there's the soul, and the body, right? And we have these ideas about how they work, but we also totally, radically, practically, on all levels, in terms of how we deal with each other and the world out there, ignore all of that, even if we have private inklings or belief systems about it. Do we actually commune with it directly and go, hey, what's up, mind, body, spirit? Show me what's true. Not so much. And maybe, just maybe, as an alternative to all the other ways we've been trying to solve the problems, maybe there we'll find some solutions. Contemplate that with me. And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily ZenCast, with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.